Hi, everyone. Welcome to the April 25th KUDO community meeting. I am Tom Runyon, and I'll be your host for today. We have a short agenda, but I just wanted to jump in and get started with some open PRs, actually. I know Fabi's been working on a version command to help triaging so that we can figure out what version of KUDO is actually causing any issue. Fabi, do you want to take a quick minute and talk about what's still left on that PR?
Absolutely, yeah. So I rebased it to switch to Go models, and then I addressed a few reviews. One of them is yours about the all good about the the customized patch for the manager, the patch YAML there, and I also addressed Jörg's question about the Docker push. So what we're actually changing there is. We introduced the version command into kubectl right now with a temporary way, not like we do with kubectl in general, but in kudoctl we have now just LD flags that like let you know the commit SHA and so forth. But what we also changed in the main work is actually in the make file. How we also push and build the Docker container, and that probably has some changes as well, so that's worth noting. But it's all discussed in the PR. That's the PR 166. But I feel confident. I think already 3 looks good to me after the rebase. Jörg and you and Ken looked at it. So I would say if there's not much like coming in by tomorrow, we merge it tomorrow maybe. Yeah. Okay. Questions to that PR from anyone, or you want to discuss anything there? I think I answered your question with what this e-file is. Just a weird backup thing. I don't know if we actually need it. I saw other projects using it too, but yeah. It's there since very early, like I think November or October, when actually no PR, but I think there was the first commit that actually Jared did, and that's how it landed there. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, as long as it's clear that it's a backup and not actually used in the customize, I think that's good.
Yeah, so to my understanding, it's not used in customize. It's just for you to kind of keep track on the changes.
Great, cool. There's an open PR for the Flink framework that I have yet to do anything on, but I need to. So I hope to get to that this week. I've been a little swamped on other things.
Oh yeah, and then there's from Mesosphere, Michael Bicycle was working on an Elasticsearch framework, and he couldn't make it today. He showed me already the gist of this one, and it works. So it gives you a very basic 3-node Elastic cluster. But I told him he should do a PR, similar like with the Flink PR. So there's one PR on the way, and I invited him also to maybe demo it or talk about it on our next KUDO community meeting next Thursday.
That'd be great. I'd love to see that. Mm-hmm. This kind of brings up the next topic, dynamic CRDs. Mainly a conversation on the API. Last week I went through the proposed API with the MySQL instance. There's been some lingering thoughts about creating a framework version with that API, and the core of it is a lot of inherent Kubernetes knowledge is required to go through and build those objects, namely because they have those shadow definitions that have the same spec as raw Kubernetes objects. So you really need to understand beforehand what it looks like to do these things in Kubernetes world so that you can create the objects correctly. And I think this comes to a bigger question about whether that's the desired skill set that's required for building a framework. If there's a lot of a priori knowledge about how Kubernetes objects are built that you need before you can build a framework, is that the right audience that we're trying to meet? And the alternative is that we have a different spec that is simpler to define, and KUDO itself knows how to compile, maybe is the right word, the other spec into the correct Kubernetes objects. And that would, on one hand, simplify framework definitions, but on the other hand, obfuscate the core Kubernetes objects that are being built or being rendered as part of the framework version. And it would also increase the onus on KUDO to do that conversion correctly, and in appropriate spec to have proper documentation about how to create these objects. So given a running Kubernetes objects, it might not be quite as simple to pull that back out and say, give me a framework version or a framework that would compile to be these objects. That might not be as simple as it would be in the current setup, where you could just export the objects and change some API objects and get the framework version you want. So there's some pros and cons in that type of paradigm. But I wanted to throw it out to the group and kind of, now that we've had a week to digest what that API looked like, and there's no major complaints. Config maps don't quite work in Customize, so we'd have to do something special there. But just to get a better feel from everyone about what they're thinking for that API.
Okay,
So I'll open it up.
I'll start. So the first thing that jumped to my mind when you were actually talking about that was looking into TensorFlow. And in TensorFlow, you have Keras as the high-level API that you can use when you develop a model. And then when you need to go deeper, you have those more technical, deeper APIs where you can like go and actually work with the raw material, if you will, right? So I like kind of that approach where we abstract already for you the whole complexity with a high-level API. So that is maybe then the compromise, like a hybrid. We have a high-level API that does this for you, so it takes away a lot of complexity, but then still somehow give the user the ability to basically go down and make some customizations. And similar, for instance, if you think about this, it's the same approach when we talk about scheduling or writing your plans and custom plans. You can use the declarative way, but then we were thinking with that API also that you can override it. In our Commons SDK, you have also you can write custom Java codes to change a little bit the scheduling logic and so forth, or reconciliation logic. So I think that's more work maybe, but I like it. I like having a high level thing, but also I think doing it more detailed is more for the edge case for people. I think most people actually will then default to the high level one that abstracts and has all this knowledge, this operational knowledge, but that's just a thought.
Yeah, I like that idea of high level and low level options. Trying to think about what it might look like in our API in Python or whatever language you're using. That kind of makes sense. You import a couple different packages, the objects Python objects always work together or something. Dynamic types, right? Trying to think about how that would look for our spec. So I'd love to see if you had even just a rough pseudocode about what that might look like from a high level versus an override. That'd be interesting to look at.
Cool. Yeah, I can brainstorm, and I'll give you something next week or the following week and see what we can do.
Even in that HackMD.
Oh yeah.
Something like there, just throw it in a new section.
I put it into the erase section where we can like go write stuff in. That's cool. Yeah. Other thoughts? Everyone else has ideas?
It is early on the West Coast there, but not that early. Okay. Something to think about going forward. Regarding dynamics, there was an idea for having a config map customized very similar to an Ansible module called line and file, which I've used in the past for modifying config files on hosts. That lets you start with a base file and then using regex and other capabilities do single line modifications. So that lets you change the port value in a config with that Ansible module. And we do something comparable here where you start with a base config map and then your parameter would able to execute a line and file mod on that config map by replacing the line that starts with port equals 8080 with the port equals whatever value. And that was one approach that we thought about for how we could add the ability to start parameterizing config map values inside the file, and be able to fuse those together rather than having to do full replaces on one parameter or the other. So I'm trying to remember if that was in chat, Slack chat, that I posted that.
Yeah, that was in the Slack chat. I also saw Jared posting, I think, Golang Q or Qlang or something.
QUE, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's I forget where I saw it, but it's a product out of Google. I'll link it in chat here. It's kind of a different syntax that lets you build YAML and JSON with a little bit more feel of programming language, and lets you import packages and leverage some of the rendering tools. I see it as a difference than something like Mustache, where Mustache was kind of this base object that one could compile into YAML or JSON. This is kind of a different way to do that. So there's the Google source about that. They have Kubernetes packages that people have built. So that might just be it. And I don't know if this is kind of the high-level language that we talk about that would then create Kubernetes objects, or whether this is something different, a different conversation entirely. I think this seems like the language that we would use to define the API, and the API might be higher level, and it might be a KUDO package in here, or it might be Cloud Native Bundle is our API. I don't. We got to figure out whether that's something we want to go down and start pursuing this higher level API, whether that's part of the dynamics or whether that's a follow-on API addition. So I believe TensorFlow came out before Keras, and they kind of had these core level objects, and they're like, oh, I start to see patterns. Let me pull back that API and give you something easier to use. As people started doing things consistently, and I feel like I'm always doing this. Great, let's make a call to do that. So maybe that's the approach we take. We start with a low-level implementation for what gets rendered, and then we can abstract away some objects.
Sounds like a good natural way. Yeah. I like at Q language, or what that is, the actual conditional formatting, and also the way how you can render and template it. It's makes it kind of elegant.
Yeah. That was all the updates we had on Dynamics. There's a couple other KEPs open right now. Skeleton generator, previous values, diagnostic templates.
So those are the two from Denis Janon, right?
Yep.
There were no comments yet on them, but when he re-PR'd them, then he did already reviews from the older one that were closed in favor to those.
Yeah. So if people want to start looking at that, maybe we can get feedback for him by next week. That would be a good.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Does anyone have any other KEPs they want to talk about, either open or not open?
Yeah, the diagnostics template KEP. I have looked it over a couple of times. It just seems somewhat incomplete. I'm expecting that there's some body to the proposal. Is that?
Pulling it up right now. Which PR number is that?
It's 176.
176. Right. Well, I think why it looks like that's what Jared also, he wants to have it as a living document just to get something started and then add more things to it. I think that's the approach there. That's why it might look a little bit incomplete.
Right. So
I
as
like
you
that
have
approach.
ideas about this, Ken, I think you submit PRs into that KEP as you would like particular implementation details of this general idea. Generally, is it a good idea to have a standardized template? Yes, great. All right, that's a KEP. All right, now as a framework debugger, as a KUDO debugger, what is helpful to you? Well, I want this ability to have these logs. Okay. And we'll add that in implementation details, and then we can start tasking based on that.
Yeah, all that makes sense for sure. I guess where I was stuck is in order to iterate on this, we kind of need this to land. That there's something that is on master, unless you're going to pull requests on pull requests kind of thing. And then the leftover question is what is the minimal viable product? What is the minimum amount of information that makes sense? And if this is that, I mean, if stating a motivation, a goal, and being clear about non-goals is the minimum, then I'm cool. We should probably merge it so we can iterate on it. Otherwise, like, it's hard to kickstart it, it seems.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I mean, if I look at the summary, like to phrase it in a human language, what it is, it replaces the issue template and just gives people an more hand-holded, guided way of like submitting issues with all the questions, similar to what we have in the issue template, but a little bit more elaborate maybe. Do I understand that then correctly? Is that what everyone gets out of it as well, or am I not really getting this KEP one?
Yeah, I guess I have some additional context to what's here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that this stems from conversation that Jared probably had with Matthias, or some observations being made while working on the orchestration team. We were commonly getting issues for which we commonly needed to ask for more information. There was a common set of things that were necessary in order to even start. So I think that's what's driving this. It is, okay, if you're coming to us with an issue and we have to, try to reproduce it or try to understand it, there's a minimum set of details we need to have in order to even start. I think that's what the genesis of this is.
Okay, so it says it supersedes the issue template, and so how we have the issue template right now, it's actually it consists of two templates: the bug report one and the enhancement request. And I think what is, in my intuition, more meant by it is actually replacing the bug report one, not so much the enhancement request, maybe.
That's how I see it as well. Maybe we should.
I think you're right about that.
Okay. And so in the bug report one, we asked already a few questions, but so I mean, I'm fine with maybe merging it so we have a conversation started, but then actually really fast having something added to define the KPIs, what is actually needed for it. And then we need to have also issues to have a little empiric data to see what people are actually filing or not. If the motivation was because issues were filed, but we couldn't really help with them because the information was missing. Right now, I don't have that gap. All the issues that are filed, we have all the information needed to. And that is just because we have maybe not the right quantity of issues yet that bring up the problem. So that's the only concern, if now is the right time of doing this, and just maybe wait until we actually naturally run into that issue.
I think it's good to have a baseline now of what we think is required, and then as issues actually get brought up by external parties, if we start seeing things that we're asking for frequently, I think then we kind of update. So I think it's to get a good baseline, just the idea that this is where we're going to capture that requirement, and then update that as time goes on.
I will add a few comments on the PR as well, and then yeah, hopefully we can merge it also this week or so.
I have a request for Ken. You had mentioned that it wasn't clear to you what the minimum criteria for a KEP is. There is actually a KEP about KEPs. So what would be helpful, if you want to submit a PR into that, outlining minimum criteria so that it's in the documentation about how to do a KEP, what the right entry point is for landing.
Yeah, with a little bit of a workflow of, hey, here's how to do it, here's what's expected, and then I'll definitely.
So that's the CAP one, the CAP process. Yeah.
Good. On it.
Awesome. Thank you. Are there any other KEP related questions? All right. I'm going to assign Jared the meeting next week so he can cancel 5 minutes before again. But hopefully he's off customer site next week so we can have him on board. I believe there was a request to do it earlier to support Europe. What was the request, Fabi?
The request was supporting Europe time. So I think we wanted to so it's actually earlier for everyone because right now it's 9 hours ahead, for instance, in Central Europe time. So that is like 5:30 p.m. So if we do it later, that's of course more in their evening. So if we do it earlier, like at 6 or something, typically the meetings here with Europe start at 6:30 a.m. West Coast time. That is then like in the afternoon in Europe. That would be a time. I mean, if we shift everything with 2 hours, we shifted it with 2 hours when we tried to accommodate the Eastern time. We shifted it now 2 hours back, maybe with European time or so.
I normally have a 9 o'clock and a 10 o'clock on Thursdays. So Eastern Standard Time for those that don't know where I am right now.
Yeah, I also don't know if
your audio went out. Can anyone else hear him, or is it just me?
No,
I can hear.
I can't hear me.
Okay, good. All right.
On a positive note, with Jared being on customer site, he's actually in my hometown. So we had drinks last night. Got up on the project.
Oh, great. Is it St. Louis?
We should have just all huddled in St. Louis for a couple days, whatever. I co-own a small airplane, and I advertised a trip, but no one's taken me up on it. So I want to give you a tour.
It's not that we don't trust you, Ken.
750 hours of time. So just to throw it out there.
Okay, that's a good amount. I've heard 10,000 is the magic number, though.
That'll be a while.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's leave it to Fabi to assign times for next week. And I think we can wrap this one up a little early.
Sounds good.
Hey, Tom, or Ken, or Joe, or Fabian, whoever. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Mike. I'm an SE on Greg Palmer's team on the East Coast. I live in New York. And Greg Palmer has a plane too. So if you ever come across him, Ken, recreational pilots of Mesosphere Club. And I just wanted to say, if you guys have any like low level basics type of stuff, I am absolutely terrible at Go, so I will not torment you with my awful pull request. But if you need documentation or other stuff, we've got some extra cycles here over on the East Coast, and I know my partner in crime, Dan Manel, is another SE here on the East Coast.
Hello.
We've got time, and we'd love to help out. So, we're in the KUDO on the Kubernetes Slack channel and in the one on Mesosphere. So, if there's a better way that we can help out and participate, oh hey York, we'd love to get involved somehow.
Or if you need coffee.
Yeah, or coffee. We are great at that.
Awesome. That's my style. I think there's a couple of different places that it would be helpful. That developer experience is one we're trying to iron out. So I don't know which customers you support or what frameworks they run, but standing up and running some of these frameworks that we've defined.
Yep.
And there's issues. We know there's issues. There's, customizations that people would want that they can't currently do. From the developer experience, looking at that HackMD that is linked in the community docs, I'll link it here. We're trying to define the right API for someone who come in and say, maybe I'm not the best at Kubernetes, maybe I don't, or maybe they are. I don't want to have to build everything from scratch and embed these processes in place. Does that sample framework look like something that's coherent to someone that's trying to produce a framework for consumption by an end user? Is that something nice? We talked about, you were in, I don't think Dan was in, that higher level language about framework developer experience and whether that's the right place to be. And the cloud native application bundle is one that's supposed to help abstract away implementation details, and it's supposed to be consumable if you want to deploy it on AWS or Mesos or Kubernetes or kind of platform agnostic. And I don't know exactly how different it is from something like Terraform because I haven't dove into either one of those well enough. But just an idea about that, what would your application definition look like? Definitely good to get external people that maybe even aren't as familiar with Kubernetes. That'd be a great place to help out. And you don't need Go, you don't even really need Kubernetes. You're trying to look at this from, I'm brand new, I want to define a framework. Does this logic make sense? Do these objects make sense? And if not, what's confusing about them? What would help simplify some of the repetitiveness that we have in definitions?
Okay, for sure. I mean, we're great at breaking stuff, so if it's broken, we will we'll confirm the brokenness.
We'll break it.
Yes, exactly. We're experts in breaking stuff.
And you can file an issue.
Right, and then we'll figure out what we need to debug your problem. That's right.
All right, cool.
Thanks, Mike and Dan. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Jorg, welcome. Nice to see you around.
I had another meeting earlier, so I couldn't be here in time. Sorry.
It's all good. We were actually about to wrap up a little shorter meeting today.
That's okay.
And Fabi's going to send out a notification for next week's time. We might try to do it earlier to support the European folks.
I will change the time in the calendar, and then I send when I send the update, I note everyone, so that should be the way how you receive the communication.
The only item I would have on my list would be the meetups like next week, but I can also just chat to Jared offline about that, as he isn't here anyhow.
Yeah, I don't know if people were trying to develop a standard set of slides for all meetups to have that consistent message, or whether they were delegating that to individuals in terms of how they want their message to coincide with the meetup's main objective.
And I'm meeting with the Flink guys next week in Berlin to also chat about the blog post. Those are kind of like my updates.
All right, I'll be sure to get that PR in.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
John Black.
Hi, everyone.